Well, a very good morning from Phuket, and today I'm going to be doing a video that I would have sooner not been making. However, I do feel that the information I'm about to give out in this video is very important, and it could potentially stop people from having a lot of worry, stress, upset and heartache on their holiday in Thailand. Now, what has prompted me to make this video? Well, a couple of things really. One, I will talk about a little bit later, which isn't quite as important as the main thing. As a lot of people will know, I have my own Facebook group and have had this group for quite some time, and steadily it's been growing in size, and I have quite a few members that share experiences of here in Thailand, and of course maybe people that have not visited Thailand before and that want information out about Thailand and possibly looking forward to their very first holiday. And this is what has prompted me to make this video, because a lady some time ago joined my group. Her name is Kate. She has a family of her husband and 2 children, and they arrived in Thailand on the 1st of April. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of Kate. I don't know her personally. I've just had several conversations over the last few days because of the situation they have now found themselves in, through no fault of their own, I might add. But it is a very stressful time, and it is Kate's very first experience of Thailand, and my heart really goes out to Kate because I feel so sorry for her being in this position and not really knowing what's going to happen over the course of the coming week. So the position with Kate is, as I mentioned, it's her first time arriving in Thailand, and they arrived on the 1st of April, so a few days ago. Now, of course, they were aware of the PCR test entering into the country, but as Kate has told me over the last few days, they had no reason to expect that any member of their family, herself, her husband, her children, would test positive on entry to Thailand. Now, a little bit of background: her husband actually had COVID in December 2020, so quite a while ago. Kate herself also had COVID in February of this year, actually the 28th of February if I remember correctly, which isn't that long ago. However, as she's told me, she didn't expect any problems because of course they have now all recovered. Now, of course, the PCR test that was required before flying to Thailand has now been removed, so people don't necessarily have to do that if they don't want to do it. However, the entry test, which is also a PCR test, is still required, and you do have to take that test. Now, Kate and her family came through the airport quite swiftly, and she was in her hotel, which she's currently staying at, which is actually behind me now, which is quite a well-known hotel here in Caron, and this is the Centara Grand Resort, so a very, very nice hotel indeed, 5-star accommodation of course. And she arrived at her hotel and posted on the group that she was excited to be here in Thailand and looking forward to her first experiences of this area. And then a few hours later, a post came on the group that unfortunately the test results had come back from their entry test, the PCR test, and her husband had tested positive. So of course this then throws Kate's world and Kate's family into chaos, because of course nobody was expecting her husband or any of them to test positive. Now, Kate had said that she'd taken some rapid tests before leaving England, the United Kingdom, because that's where she's originally from, and they had all come back negative. So as I mentioned, no sort of inkling that there might be a problem. However, this problem has arose, and now behind me in the hotel, of course, Kate is extremely worried, doesn't know what to expect. I've been in contact with her because of course my heart went out to her, being just arriving here and having this devastating news of her husband testing positive. And this is something that I think a lot of people, including Kate, has said herself, that they don't really think could happen to them. And unfortunately, there is a real chance of yourselves, you testing positive, if you're coming to Thailand while this test is still in place, then I would strongly recommend people understand the risk by coming. I'm not trying to deter people from coming. In fact, totally the opposite. I want to encourage tourism to Thailand. That is my whole purpose of my channel. My channel is an information-based channel that encourages tourism, that gives out correct and accurate information, because unfortunately in today's technology world we have a lot of information, and a lot of that information is not necessarily 100% accurate. And this is one of the reasons what prompted me to start my Facebook group, because unfortunately there are an awful lot of groups that cover Thailand and indeed right here in Phuket that are not monitored closely enough, and a lot of members, and I'm talking about some of these groups are quite large, so people that make comments can influence a lot of people. And I've seen over the past month or 12 months, 2 years, lots of inaccurate information about the ongoing situation, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start my Facebook group. But going back to Kate's story, before I veer off, I will be talking about Facebook groups a little bit later in this video. I don't want to make it too long, but I do think it's important that people understand the risks of coming into Thailand. Even if you've not had COVID, there is still a risk that you could test positive, even though you don't have any symptoms. Kate has told me her husband has no symptoms whatsoever. So what has happened with Kate? Well, of course, her husband has tested positive, so then they had to be separated because Kate and the 2 children have tested negative. Now, for Kate to be able to have a separate room, they had to do some more tests. These were what they call rapid antigen tests. And again, these results for Kate and her 2 children have come back negative. So the hotel has moved Kate into a separate accommodation so that they can isolate Kate's husband, because at the moment, as it stands, he has tested positive. Now, he is taking another test later today, which will be a PCR test, because originally the hotel recommended Kate wait for 5 days before her husband takes another test. But of course, what you have now is the situation where, of course, Kate has had to pay for the rapid tests, which cost 800 baht each. So you've got 3 of those, which is 2,400 baht. She's also had to pay for the extra room because of the separation. So she's having to pay for that on a daily basis. And of course, at a 5-star resort, it's not going to be cheap. Now, Kate does have insurance, so she will be able to claim all or part of some of these costs, and she has told me that she's been in touch with her insurance and they've explained that she needs to keep all the receipts and documentation of what's going on, and they will sort it out when she arrives back into England. But this is something that Kate's having to deal with right here, right now, so she's having to find this money up front. And she's not 100% sure, while she should get her money, or most of her money, back from the insurance company. Of course, she's not going to be sure until that process is underway and she's back in England making the claim. So this is something that I want to make people aware of, because I think they overlook the gravity of the situation if you test positive. And I feel that it's very important that people understand that there is a risk. Even though it might be the furthest thing from your mind and you have no reason to suspect you may test positive, to have a plan in place in case the worst case scenario was to happen, which has happened to Kate. Nobody wants this to happen, but it could possibly happen. Now, of course, Kate hadn't got a plan in place because she never thought it would be an issue, even though both Kate and her husband have had COVID in the past. They didn't consider that it would be an issue on entering Thailand. Now, I have read a lot of comments and information online in various groups, media outlets, etc., about what they're talking, the recovery certificate, and there's a lot of inaccurate information. And even on the official websites of Thailand, there's some information that's missing on there that I feel is very important, and it does mention the recovery certificates. However, there is a section of information that really should have been included that hasn't been included, and that is causing a lot of confusion. People are under the impression if they have recently had COVID, as long as they have a recovery certificate, if they come through the airport and test positive, because they have the recovery certificate, it will give them immunity from quarantine. Unfortunately, that is not accurate, and it is not necessarily the case. What actually happens is if you take the test, of course you're going to have to take the test, and it should come back positive. What it actually comes down to is something called the CT levels. Now, I'm not a medical expert, and I'm not an expert in this area. It's only from what I've read and been told, and again I'm going on other sources to be accurate. But if your CT levels are below a level that the government have set, regardless of whether you have the certificate or not, you will have to quarantine. Now, if your CT levels are above the recommended level that the government has set, and there is some discrepancy on the level, and this is why I'm not saying it, because unofficially I've read that the level is 30, but I've also seen that the level unofficially is 25. Now, I don't know which is correct, and I don't know because I can't find official documentation that's crystal clear to tell me what the official level is. So whatever the official level is, if your CT level is below that, regardless of the certificate you may be carrying, you will have to quarantine. And if your level is above it, they are happy with the recovery certificate for you not to have to quarantine. So this is something that's very important. People must understand, not to be under the impression just simply because they have this certificate they're going to come into the country and not have any worries, because even if they test positive, they're not going to have to do any quarantine, because that is not necessarily accurate. Of course, it's going to be on individual basis, and it's going to come down to this CT levels. And I would strongly recommend that if you have recently had COVID and you know this, that you need to find out what those official levels are. As I've mentioned, unofficially I've seen it 30 and 25. Now, I don't know out of those two which applies to the test and go, which applies to the sandbox, and which applies to the state quarantine, if it applies to the state quarantine, because you would have to quarantine anyway if you're going into the alternative state quarantine. And again, with the sandbox, I'm not quite clear on the rules. I'm not an expert on this. What I'm trying to do is bring this to light so people can research it and have a backup plan in place, because of course Kate's family now, everything has gone into turmoil, everything is in chaos. She's panicking, she's under a lot of pressure, she's under a lot of stress. Quite understandable, I might add, as well. I really feel for her, because it's her first time here. She doesn't know what's going to happen. As I mentioned, the hotel have asked her to wait 5 days and then retest. However, with the costs that are escalating because of the accommodation isn't cheap, and whilst the hotel have given Kate a discount on the extra room, it is still expensive because we're talking about a 5-star hotel. Now, I did actually go online just to check to see what the cheapest room I could get at the Centaura, putting in Kate's position, 1 adult, 2 children, and the cheapest room was coming out at over 2,000 dearer than what Centaura had given to Kate. So they have given us some discount, but of course she's still having to find that extra money, and she doesn't yet know how many nights she's going to have to pay for that extra room, because it's unclear at the minute to how long her husband may have to stay in quarantine. Officially it's 10 days, but of course it will come down to the PCR tests. Now, she could have waited 5 days and had her husband retake the test. If it would have come back negative, then there would be a good chance that after 5 days he would be released from quarantine. However, she's having to pay for that extra accommodation for 5 nights. She's still got to pay for the test for her husband, whether it's today or in 5 days' time. It doesn't make any difference. She's still got to pay for that. So she's decided with her husband that they want to take the test sooner to make sure that the test at the airport is 100% accurate, because as we all know, sometimes tests are not always accurate and mistakes happen. I'm not saying that is the case here, but we won't know until later today when he's taken the second test. Unfortunately, if he takes a test today and it does come back positive, then it will look more than likely he will have to spend 10 nights in quarantine, because until he brings back a negative test, the hotel's quarantine staff are not going to be prepared to release him out of quarantine until he's starting to test negative. So there's a risk either way, but unfortunately Kate is now in a no-win situation. Her husband, not a nice experience for him. It's his first time also in Thailand. He's been separated from his wife. I don't know what his thoughts are because I haven't spoken to him, but I could imagine he's under a lot of pressure, he's under a lot of stress, he's worrying about Kate, he's worrying about his children, of course. He knows full well it's Kate's first time here. She doesn't know the etiquette here in Thailand. She doesn't know the area. Now, I have said to Kate, because I really feel for her, I don't know her personally, it's just somebody that's joined my group that has taken part in some of the comments and questions and posts that have been on the group, and then I've got to know her a little bit through that over the last few months, because of course she's been asking about Thailand. I have offered Kate that myself and Nat, my wife, will come over to Karon, and if she wants, I will take her around either Karon or the island and show her some of the sights and some of the great things we have here in Phuket. Now, of course, this isn't going to make up for losing her husband in quarantine and being on her own with the children. In no way is this going to make up, but it's going to help, rather than her sit here in the hotel for maybe 10 days by herself and her children, because obviously her husband is not allowed out of the room. Now, there was a stage yesterday where they actually thought they would all have to quarantine because Kate and her children are what they call high risk. And this is why she had to take more tests, because obviously she's travelled with her husband to Thailand. She's been in close contact with her husband. Her husband testing positive automatically puts Kate and her children into the high risk category. However, because the rapid tests have now come back negative, the hotel's medical staff have issued Kate and her children a medical certificate to give them the all clear, and whilst they have been separated from her husband for obvious reasons, she is now allowed to leave her room, and obviously wherever she needs to go she can go now, whereas at one stage we thought that that wouldn't be the case, because if she hadn't have taken the tests, then the hotel would have had to quarantine them all, because of as I've just said, Kate is now classed as a high risk, or was yesterday. But hopefully things are going to move forward in the next few days, and maybe, fingers crossed, that the test that the husband took at the airport is inaccurate. I'm hoping that maybe that could be the case. I'm not saying it is, but I am hoping, because it does happen from time to time, but we won't know just yet until maybe tomorrow when we get the results back. But this is something that I want to highlight, and Kate's given me her permission to do this video and actually encouraged me to do it, because she wants people to understand and realise that it's a real risk. Even if you think it's not, have a plan in place. And what I mean by that is, if one of your family is tested positive, you need to know what you're going to do, because Kate doesn't know what to do. And as I've said, I've offered to take her out, show her some of the local restaurants to make it a little bit easier for her, so she doesn't feel that she's stuck in the hotel for however long the quarantine period is. We don't know, but it could possibly be 10 days. Now, she's due to fly back to England on the 16th, so if her husband has to spend 10 days, it means all they've got left is maybe 5 days of the holiday, which is just devastating, because Kate has been looking forward, saving and preparing for this for over 2 years, and to have this thrown on her now out of the blue is totally devastating, and I really do feel for the whole family. And of course, Kate being her first time, she doesn't know the ropes here, so she's going to find it a little bit of a struggle, especially with 2 young children to have to deal with here, and not knowing where to go, where to eat, etc., and being alone. I don't think she can speak Thai, so again, not necessarily that you need to, but it's all disadvantages, and that makes it a little bit harder. So I really want to help Kate in any way I can, and I have made that offer from me and Nat. We're more than willing to come over, whether it be in the daytime or night time, and take her out, show her some of the places around Caron, or even further afield, and at least try and give her some good memories of this holiday, because clearly it's given her a negative impression straight away of Thailand. And of course, she's going to be angry, she's going to be frustrated, and she's going to be very upset. So this is why I'm making this video. I want to make it very clear to people that even if you have a recovery certificate or you've never had COVID, everything hinges on the airport test. Until that is removed, everything hinged on that test, and should you have a positive test, then your whole holiday, your whole world will go into crisis mode. So have some sort of backup plan, put some money aside. This is very, very important. Doesn't matter whether you need it or not. At least if it's there, it's one less thing to have to worry about, to stress over, because it can cost a lot of money and it can mount up very quickly. As I've said, Kate has got to pay for another PCR test. I'm not quite sure of the cost. I think she said it was 3,500. I may be wrong. Her tests yesterday were 800 baht each. So as you can see, it's already starting to mount up. That's without the cost of accommodation. Bearing in mind her husband's in a 5-star hotel. He can't leave the room, so he can't go out for food. He's got to either order from the 5-star restaurant, which is not going to be not going to be cheap. It's going to be very expensive, especially if you're eating lunch and evening meal. And now I know they're staying there on a bed and breakfast basis, so the breakfast is not going to cost money, but any other meals will. Of course, I've given Kate a list of all the local delivery food apps that are on the island, things like Food Panda and Grab and various other ones that they do. Of course, there are a few restaurants that will deliver food to the hotel, which is going to help save money. But this is where you need this plan. You need this in place. Have a list of things that are going to help you in this situation. Hopefully you're not going to need it, but at least if it's there, then it's one less thing to worry about, something that you've got, and you can follow this plan and it's going to help you. Decide on what you're going to do if one member of the family tests positive and not everybody, because you're going to be separated. It may be your wife, it may be your husband, it may be your friend, whatever the situation, it may be a child. They're on their own, they're separated, they're going to be under a lot of pressure and stress and worry. You're going to be separated from them, you're going to be under the same pressure, worrying about where to go, what to do. Do I just wait in the hotel? Don't forget, all the time that you're sitting in the hotel, your holiday is unfortunately disappearing. So all the money you've paid for it is gone, because you can't get that back because you're already here. So maybe it's a wise thing. I know a few people in my group have said already, even though the PCR test is no longer required before flight, they are still wanting to take it just for that little bit of reassurance. And I don't think that's a bad idea, to be honest. I think maybe it would have been better if things had been the other way round. They had kept the pre-arrival test and done away with the entry test. At least people would have the option. Obviously, if they test positive, then they wouldn't be able to fly, which would save them this situation here actually in Thailand. Now, going back to what I mentioned about Facebook groups, it's very rare. I do follow a lot of groups, I'll be honest with you, because I like to know what's going on in other groups. Sometimes it makes my blood boil, to be honest, because following the groups, I can clearly see that people who have started these groups either do not live here or have very limited knowledge or maybe limited interest in the actual group. Their reasoning behind starting the groups, I don't know. Mine was to make sure that the information given out in my group is as accurate as it possibly can be, and I always try to verify anything that I post or any other people post. When it comes down to information, especially important information, on the ongoing situation here in Thailand is accurate, because I realise that people read these comments, these posts, and they may be influenced by them and may misunderstand the rules and regulations or certain things that are going on in Thailand. And sometimes I've seen groups that are clearly not monitored allow people to post maybe things that they've heard, maybe things that they're not quite sure about, hearsay, rumours, and that's never a good thing. Because if you're going to post something, just bear in mind that a lot of people may read that post, and whilst you don't want to take responsibility for that post if things go wrong, that post could potentially affect somebody's holiday, entry into Thailand, whatever it may be. And this is one of the reasons why I don't do too many posts on visas, even though I know the basic information about visas, because I've been coming to Thailand for a very long time. I am no way any expert on visa advice, and I do not wish to give incorrect advice. So this is something that has been playing on my mind for some time, and the reason why this incident with Kate and what happened a couple of weeks ago has prompted me to want to do this video. And I read a comment in quite a large group, and they've got something like 50 or 60,000 followers, members, whatever you want to call it. They're supposed to specialise here in Phuket, and a person from Australia, I'm not going to mention any names, it was a lady in Australia, posted a comment saying that if you have a recovery certificate and you test positive, you will not have to quarantine. And normally I don't post in other groups outside of my own because of exactly what happening. And I just thought to myself, well, this could be read potentially by a lot of people, and it's actually inaccurate. So I made a short comment saying that unfortunately this isn't quite 100% accurate, and it goes on the CT levels. And then I got a response saying, clearly you don't know what you're talking about. The Australian government have said blah 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 blah, and you're a troll. So this is the sort of attitude I get for trying to help people. So I thought, well, I answered back saying, well, good luck with your entry into Thailand. I wish you all the best, and hopefully you won't test positive on the airport even though you have a recovery certificate. Because I thought, what the Australian government may have posted on their websites or whatever it may be is pretty similar probably to what's been posted on the Thai government sites. And whilst it does list the recovery certificate, it doesn't mention about the CT levels. Now, I only found out myself by accident a few weeks ago because I was talking to somebody who was in the same position as Kate. The only difference between Kate and that person was the fact that he had had COVID recently and he had got a recovery certificate. However, he still had to spend 5 days in quarantine because his CT levels, and he explained what had gone on. Now, again, I can't officially confirm this. I can only take from what I was being told. I don't normally report on what I'm being told unless I can officially confirm it, but this seemed pretty accurate, and I have been told the same story by a few managers of well-known hotels, so I believe it to be truthful. But however, it doesn't mention it on the websites for the Thai government, so it's something to bear in mind because it's missing information that's very important. Well, I hope this has sort of highlighted a situation here that could come about through no fault of your own, I might add, but it is one of those situations that nobody wants to think about that's going to happen to them, but it is something you should have in the back of your mind and really have a plan in place that if the worst was to happen like Kate, and I hope this situation resolves itself very, very soon and we can get her husband out of quarantine and they can carry on enjoying their holiday, because this has really overcast it, no doubt. And I hope that's sooner rather than later, but we're not sure how long that's going to be. So please bear this information in mind. If you're coming here, whether you've had COVID or not, whether you've got a certificate or not, have it in your mind. You need a plan just in case. Hopefully you'll never need the plan, but isn't it better to have the plan than not have the plan in place? Isn't it better to have those funds, that money put aside already, than not to have it and then have to start to panic where you're going to find all this extra money from? Have a few ideas for your family if you're travelling with a family or a group. Should one of you test positive, what are you going to do? What's the other people going to do in the group, the family? Are they going to just sit around waiting for this person? Because nobody knows how long the quarantine will be. Officially it's 10 days. It could be less if you test positive. If you test negative during that period. But it all comes down to ifs and buts, and that's why I say you have to look at the worst case scenario. Think to yourself, well, if I get tested positive, I'm going to be spending 10 nights in quarantine. Where am I going to find the money for the extra accommodation, for the food, for everything else that's going to go with it? So just bear that in mind. Make sure you notify your insurance company straight away. Should this situation happen, do what Kate did. Contact the insurance company the very first morning you can, after you know when you've got the news of the positive test, so they're aware of the situation and you can get some advice. Look through your small print of your insurance document. Make sure what you're covered for. Make sure you're covered for extra accommodation, for extra tests, because if you're not, you're going to have to find the money yourself. Kate hopefully should be covered for most of it, and she will be able to get some of her money back, but it's no consolation to losing her holiday, because at the moment, as it stands, she hasn't got a very long period that she's going to be able to enjoy a holiday with her family. We're not sure yet. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and it's on a somber note, as I say, that I bring you this, and I wish honestly that I hadn't had to make this. This is not something that has given me any pleasure in doing, but I do feel it's important that people know and understand the situation, because I don't think this is being highlighted enough, that there is a real risk of people testing positive coming into Thailand while the test is still in place. And whilst I do not want to discourage people from coming, I do think it's important that if you decide to travel, that you are aware of the situation here in Thailand, and that there is a real possibility of testing positive. Now, people are going to say, oh, it's a scam, this, that and the other. Now, honestly, I don't believe that for a minute. And I don't believe that they want people to test positive, because this is just going to give a very negative impression of Thailand, and people are going to think what they want to think, and that is up to them. But all I want people to do is just have something in place should the worst happen. And that's the best advice I can say. Have a plan, have it in the back of your mind. Don't stress about it, don't worry about it overly, but just be aware it is a possibility, and not just take it for granted, because if you find yourself in that terrible, terrible position, you need to have something that you can look to keep yourself on a level footing, keep the stress levels down to as much as possible, because it is going to be an extremely stressful time, and you're not going to know whether you're coming or going during that period. Well, as I say, I hope you found this video helpful, and that really leaves me to say, as always, until next time, you take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.